Imagine your life right now. Just, picture your normal day-to-day. Tomorrow you wake up and someone hands you $10,000 a month.
Tax-free.
Tax-free, exactly. I mean, it feels like a dream, right?
Oh, totally.
It feels like absolute freedom. You get comfortable. You build a life around it. But what if the moment you finally settle in, the person signing those checks tells you that the only way to keep the lights on...
The only way to not lose everything.
Right. The only way to not lose everything you've built is to sell out your closest friends.
Yeah. It is... It's just the ultimate psychological trap. It transforms what looks like this unparalleled generosity into a hostage situation.
Yeah.
Like the ransom is literally your own moral compass.
It's terrifying. And welcome to the Deep Duck, by the way. We are taking a single, profoundly raw, anonymous confession posted by a woman on Reddit, and we're going to put this thing under a microscope.
Because it really is one of the most compelling pieces of primary text we've analyzed.
It is.
Just because of the sheer density of the psychological mechanics at play here. I mean, the author isn't just telling a sad story. She is actively performing an autopsy on her own loss of agency.
That's a great way to put it, an autopsy. Because on the surface, if you just read the bullet points, it sounds like, I don't know, tabloid fodder.
The classic scandal.
Exactly. A younger woman meets a wealthy, well-known man. He bombards her with thousands of dollars before anything physical happens. They become intimate. She becomes dependent on this $10,000 a month lifeline. Then the money slows down.
And then the ultimatum drops.
Right. He coerces her into recruiting her friends for him to keep the cash flowing. And now, years later, she's paralyzed by this shame so deep it's actively destroying her present life.
But beneath all those bullet points, like if you really look at the text, it is a masterclass in the architecture of dependency.
It really is.
It maps out how coercion actually functions in real time, not in movies, but in the subtle, invisible negotiations we make with our own boundaries.
So let's start right at the beginning, the lure. Because the trap doesn't work if the bait isn't perfectly calibrated, right?
Exactly. The bait has to be irresistible.
Right. So the author notes that when she was younger, she met this wealthy man, but she includes a very specific detail. She says he was, quote, only a few years older.
Which is huge.
It is. Because usually when we hear about extreme financial dependency, there is a massive structural age gap.
Right. The classic sugar daddy trope.
Exactly. The 18-year-old and the 60-year-old. So how does the proximity in their ages, the fact that they're close in age, fundamentally change the threat detection here?
Well, it bypasses her psychological security system entirely. I mean, society hands us a very specific script for massive age gaps intertwined with money.
Right. We all know that script.
We are culturally conditioned to recognize that dynamic as inherently transactional. Like if a man 30-year, your senior hands you $5,000, your brain immediately registers that an exchange is being negotiated.
You know exactly what's happening.
Right. You might accept the money, but your eyes are open to the transaction.
The boundaries are sharply defined. Like you know what room you are walking into.
Exactly. But when the person is a peer, when he's only a few years older, that cultural script just vanishes. It doesn't feel like a transaction. It feels like an exceptionally lucky romantic encounter.
Like you just hit the jackpot on Tinder or something.
Exactly. You think you've just met a really successful guy from your own generation. So the age proximity masks the power imbalance under this guise of egalitarian romance. She let her guard down because he looked like an equal.
And the moment her guard is down, he deploys the second part of the lure. She states that he showered her with attention and thousands of dollars, and this is the key part, before anything physical ever happened.
That's the linchpin.
Right. She explicitly writes, looking back, I can see how much that influenced me. I want to pause on this because, I don't know, it feels counterintuitive to how transactional coercion usually works. Normally, it's a direct swap. You do this, I give you that.
Right, a tit for tat. But the delay of the physical expectation is honestly the most insidious mechanism of the entire trap.
How so?
Because by providing immense financial value before crossing any physical boundaries, he isn't buying her. He's establishing what we call an invisible ledger.
An invisible ledger, I like that.
Yeah, because human beings are deeply biologically wired for reciprocity. When someone gives us something of value, we feel a profound, almost physical pressure to balance the scales.
Oh, for sure. It's like the discomfort of an unearned gift. I mean, even on a micro scale, if someone buys you a coffee, you feel compelled to get the next round.
Exactly. Now multiply that coffee by thousands of dollars.
Wow.
It creates a crushing, unspoken indebtedness.
And because he didn't ask for intimacy up front, she couldn't reject the money as a purchase.
Right. It was framed as pure, unconditional generosity, which totally disarms the recipient. But the ledger is still recording the debt.
So by the time the relationship transitioned into physical intimacy,
Her consent was already heavily compromised.
by the sheer weight of what she had accepted.
Exactly. She wasn't making a free choice to be intimate. She was essentially paying off a debt she didn't fully realize she had incurred.
It's like being handed the keys to a sprawling, fully staffed mansion.
I love this analogy.
Right. You walk in, the fridge is stocked, the pool is heated, there's no mortgage. You're just enjoying the luxury, convinced that the person who gave you the keys did it out of pure affection.
Just out of the goodness of their heart.
Yeah. You don't even think to check the doors. It's only much, much later, when you try to leave, that you realize the doors were designed to lock from the outside.
That is exactly it. The invisible ledger is what locks those doors. And the text shows exactly how that lock is reinforced. Because once that physical threshold is crossed, we move from the initial free trial of luxury into the structural phase of the trap.
The golden handcuff.
The golden handcuffs.
This is where the numbers become just staggering. She moves from receiving random thousands of dollars to a steady dependency of around $10,000 a month.
Every single month.
Let's actually sit with that number for a moment for everyone listening. 10 grand a month, $120,000 a year, tax-free, dropped into the lap of a young woman. That isn't disposable income for buying designer bags.
No, not at all.
That alters the fundamental baseline of your reality.
And her phrasing is critical here. She says she, quote, became financially dependent on it, and it was very hard to walk away from that kind of money.
Yeah.
Because dependency isn't about luxury. It's about infrastructure.
Right.
That $10,000 became the load-bearing pillar of her existence. It dictated where she lived, who she socialized with, how she presented herself to the world.
Well, if we look at the psychology of lifestyle creep, it's not just that you enjoy the nicer things, it's that your baseline for survival shifts. The idea of walking away from that money isn't just about giving up a nice apartment. It's about facing an absolute, terrifying free fall.
Yes. It is an existential threat to the identity she built while inside that mansion. When your entire world, your entire sense of safety, is scaffolded by someone else's wealth.
You can't just step off the scaffold.
Exactly. Your ability to make independent choices atrophies. The concept of agency becomes theoretical. You stop asking, is this relationship healthy for me? And you start asking, what will happen to me if the scaffold collapses?
But I'm stuck on the phrasing she uses. She says it was very hard to walk away. She doesn't say it was impossible.
Right.
She is acknowledging that the door was technically unlocked. She could have turned the knob. Why didn't she?
Because the physiological terror of sudden, catastrophic financial ruin often outweighs the slow, creeping psychological damage of staying.
Wow.
It's the illusion of free will. Yes, the door is unlocked, but if opening that door means stepping out of a penthouse and into a sheer drop with no parachute,
You're going to stay in the room.
you will stay in the room. And you will rationalize staying in the room. And the architect of this trap knows that. He relied on her fear of the fall to secure her compliance for the next, far more dangerous phase.
Which brings us to the pivot. The darkest chapter of her confession. She's entirely dependent. This $10,000 tether is the only thing holding her life together. And suddenly, the money starts to slow down. The scaffold starts shaking.
Right. And he introduces the ultimatum.
Yeah.
The condition for the money continuing is no longer just her time or her body. It is her complicity. He demands that she recruit her friends to meet him.
Okay, here is where we have to look closely at the mechanics of this, because the author provides a massive caveat that complicates everything. She writes that her friends actually saw him willingly.
Yes, she makes a point to say that.
She points out his youth, his wealth, his well-known status. She explicitly states they made their own decisions. So from a purely objective standpoint, she made an introduction, and her adult friends made their own consensual choices.
Right, mechanically speaking.
Right. So if they walked in with their eyes open, why is this the specific action that breaks her? Why is her guilt so agonizing here?
We have to analyze the intent behind his demand. I mean, he was young, wealthy, and well-known. He possessed immense social capital.
Yeah, he didn't need her.
Exactly. He could have found women himself with zero effort. The objective was never simply to gain access to her friends. The objective was to force her to be the one delivering them.
Oh, man. He wanted to corrupt the facilitator.
He wanted to shatter her moral framework. By forcing her to commodify her closest relationships to maintain her own survival, he made her an active participant in his exploitation.
He didn't just want her obedience.
Right. He wanted her complicity.
It's a complete inversion of her identity. I mean, she goes from being the victim of his financial coercion to acting as an agent of it. She's literally serving up the people she loves to feed the machine that is trapping her.
And the fact that her friends were willing, swayed by the exact same halo of wealth and status that initially lured her.
That doesn't make it better.
No, it does not alleviate her guilt. In fact, it deepens the moral injury. She knew the reality behind the facade. She knew about the invisible ledger. She knew about the trap.
Right, she had already seen the locked doors.
Exactly. And instead of warning them, instead of protecting them, she held the door open and invited them inside.
Because she needed the 10 grand a month.
She traded their safety for her own financial stability.
Yeah.
And when you are forced into a position where you calculate the value of your friends based on what they can extract from a predator to keep you housed,
you fracture your own humanity.
That is why she writes, "But I still carry guilt about my role in it." She recognizes that their consent was manufactured by his wealth, and her role was the necessary bridge to that exploitation.
It just poisons the fundamental concept of trust. You cannot look at yourself in the mirror as a good friend or even a good person if you know you acted as a broker for someone else's manipulation.
Which is precisely what births the devastating sequence she details next.
The anatomy of her regret.
Yes, the anatomy of her regret.
She looks back from the present day, years removed from the actual events, and she structures her remorse in 3 very distinct, blunt sentences. She writes, "I regret getting involved in the first place. I regret not leaving sooner. I regret introducing friends to him."
And if you look closely at those 3 sentences, they are not just a general expression of sorrow. They track the exact chronological erosion of her agency. It's a timeline of how she lost herself.
Let's pull those apart for the listener. The first one, I regret getting involved in the first place.
So this is a mourning of her initial naivete. She is looking back at that early period, the young, wealthy guy, the thousands of dollars before intimacy, and grieving the fact that she didn't see the hook hidden inside the bait.
Right. She regrets stepping onto the invisible ledger.
Exactly.
And the second sentence, I regret not leaving sooner.
This moves into the phase of the golden handcuffs. She recognizes that there was a window, however terrifying, where she was dependent, but not yet complicit.
Yeah.
She is agonizing over her failure to choose the free fall over the trap. She regrets her paralysis.
It makes me think about how regret compounds. Like the first regret getting involved is like regretting walking through the doors of a casino. You wish you had just stayed home.
Right.
But the second regret, not leaving sooner, is regretting staying at the blackjack table until you lost your mortgage payment. You knew the odds were against you, but you were paralyzed by the sunk cost.
That's a perfect way to look at it. But the third regret introduces an entirely different category of emotional devastation. I regret introducing friends to him.
If we stick with the casino analogy, this isn't just losing your own money. This is turning to your best friend, who came in to check on you, and convincing them to sit down at the rig table next to you just so the pit boss will comp your next drink.
It is the moment the damage breaches containment. Because when we make mistakes that only harm ourselves, we lose our money, we break our own hearts, the regret is painful, but it is isolated.
We can rationalize it.
We can process it as a personal failure. But when our desperation causes us to draw innocent people into the blast radius, that regret doesn't fade. It metastasizes.
Because you can't just forgive yourself for your own pain. You have to reckon with the pain you authored in someone else's life. And the author makes it incredibly clear that this compounding regret didn't just heal with time. It mutated into something actively destructive. It became shame.
And the psychological distinction between guilt and shame is the key to understanding her current paralysis. She says, "What I struggle with most now is the shame. I feel like this experience has become a dark cloud that follows me everywhere."
We use those words interchangeably in casual conversation, don't we? Like, I feel guilty, I feel ashamed.
All the time.
But in the context of this confession, the difference is literally life and death for her present identity. What is the mechanism separating the two?
Guilt is tethered to behavior. Guilt says, I did a bad thing.
Right. The action.
Exactly. When she thinks about introducing her friends, she feels guilt. She recognizes the action was harmful. But shame is tethered to identity. Shame says, I am a bad person.
Oh, wow.
Shame takes the regret of the action and internalizes it as a permanent core defect of the self.
So the experience isn't just a chapter in her past. It is the entire summary of her worth.
Exactly. The dark cloud isn't just a memory. It is a lens through which she views her entire present existence. And we see the practical, paralyzing effect of this shame in her romantic life.
Yeah, she writes that she is terrified of getting into serious relationships. She is afraid that if a man finds out about her past, quote, he'll see me differently or leave.
And this fear is profoundly deep. It's not just anxiety about an awkward conversation on a third date.
No.
It's a fundamental conviction that she is inherently unlovable in the context of a healthy relationship. She assumes that any decent person would be utterly repulsed by the reality of what she did to survive.
She has essentially adopted the predator's view of her, that she is a commodity, she is compromised, she is permanently tainted.
And what elevates this from a private internal struggle to a living nightmare is that her fear of exposure isn't irrational paranoia.
Right, it's actually happened.
Yes. She provides a chilling detail about her current reality. She writes, I've already had experiences where people found out through others, and it made me feel like I would never be able to escape it.
That phrase, found out through others, that is just the absolute destruction of narrative control. Imagine trying to build a new life, trying to evolve past your darkest mistakes, but you are forced to walk around with a sealed criminal record.
Right.
And you know that at any random moment, without any warning, that record might spontaneously leak to the public.
It creates a state of chronic, agonizing hypervigilance. The concept of social leakage in the information age operates like a panopticon.
You never know who is watching or who knows what.
Exactly. You never know who knows. You meet someone new, you begin to trust them, you start to feel a fragile sense of safety, and then a friend of a friend mentions the wealthy man at a dinner party. A rumor travels through a social circle. The leak happens.
The record opens and the judgment falls. And she isn't even in the room to defend herself or provide the context of the coercion.
Because society does not deal in the nuances of psychological traps. Society deals in rapid moral judgments. The social stigma surrounding women who have been involved in transactional dynamics is incredibly aggressive and highly gendered.
Oh, completely.
The collective gaze focuses entirely on the woman's perceived greed, taking the $10,000 a month, and completely ignores the sophisticated manipulation, the invisible leisure, and the coercive control exerted by the wealthy man.
The architect of the trap walks away with zero social friction, while the person who barely survived it carries a permanent scarlet letter.
It's devastating.
And this brings us to the agonizing paradox that she outlines at the very end of her post. It's a desperate plea to the void of the internet.
She writes, I know I can't change what happened, but I don't know how to stop defining myself by it. I'm incredibly insecure about it, and sometimes I feel like no matter how much I've grown as a person, this will always be the thing people judge me for.
There is a brutal tragedy in that sentence. She recognizes her own evolution. No matter how much I've grown as a person, she knows she is no longer the naive girl blinded by the initial thousands of dollars.
Right.
She is no longer the terrified, dependent woman who sold out her friends to keep the lights on. She has survived. She has changed.
And yet she yields all of the authority over her self-worth to hypothetical future judges.
Yeah.
She is effectively holding her present grown self hostage to the terrified decisions of her past self. She acknowledges her growth, but immediately invalidates it by prioritizing the imagined disgust of people who might find out through others.
I have to play devil's advocate here, though, because if I'm putting myself in her shoes, isn't her terror entirely rational? I mean, you just pointed out how unforgiving society is. She explicitly stated that people have found out, and she has experienced the devastating fallout of that judgment.
True.
So if you live in a reality where the people around you refuse to let you move on, how can you possibly just stop defining yourself by it? Isn't telling her to ignore the judgment like telling someone to stand in a hurricane and just ignore the wind? The wind is real. The judgment is real.
Her fear is entirely rational. The societal judgment is a very real, very present threat. But acknowledging the reality of the threat is different from internalizing it.
Okay, unpack that.
That is the core mechanism of shame. Shame takes the external stigma, the whispers, the judgment, the leaked rumors, and translates it into an internal truth. To survive the hurricane, you don't pretend the wind isn't blowing. You build a shelter.
So what's her shelter?
Her shelter has to be the decoupling of her own inherent value from the microscopic, unnuanced judgments of outsiders.
She has to stop agreeing with her own critics.
Precisely. She has to look back at that younger version of herself, not with the disgust of society, but with radical clinical compassion. She needs to see the invisible ledger.
She needs to see the trap for what it was.
She needs to recognize the sheer weight of the golden handcuffs. She needs to understand the impossible, agonizing choices that younger woman was forced to make under extreme psychological and financial duress.
But doing that in a vacuum entirely alone while carrying the weight of the shame, it feels impossible. Which explains the final heartbreaking questions she asks the internet. She asks, has anyone else had a part of their past that they deeply regretted and feared would ruin future relationships? How did you learn to forgive yourself and stop letting it control your life?
And those questions, they're not a request for a self-help checklist. She isn't looking for someone to tell her to practice mindfulness or write in a gratitude journal.
No, she's looking for proof of life.
Exactly. She is searching for a community of survivors. By casting this out into the anonymous expanse of Reddit, she is asking the most fundamental human question. Is redemption possible?
Yeah.
Can a person endure extreme moral compromise, facilitate harm, survive a coercive trap, and still be worthy of a new, untainted life? Has anyone else lived inside this specific dark cloud and actually found a way to walk out of it?
She needs validation that she is not an inherent monster. She is just a human being who was caught in a brilliantly designed trap and who made terrible, desperate choices to survive it.
And the very act of writing this post, even under the cloak of anonymity, is the first definitive strike against the power of her shame.
Really? Just by posting it?
Yes, because shame is a pathogen that requires absolute secrecy to replicate. It demands silence. The moment you articulate the source of the shame, the moment you say, this is the trap, this is how I fell in, and this is the damage I caused, you breach the containment.
You let the air in.
You introduce oxygen. You stop waiting for the narrative to leak through others, and you begin the excruciating process of owning it yourself.
Man, it is a profound, incredibly heavy journey. And it's staggering how much architectural detail about human coercion is embedded in just a few paragraphs of a Reddit confession.
Let's pull the lens back and recap the full scope of what we've uncovered in this deep dive.
We observed the mechanics of the lure, how age proximity neutralized her threat detection, and how the strategic deployment of unearned wealth created an invisible ledger, deeply compromising her consent before physical intimacy even entered the equation.
Right, and then we explored the structural trap of the golden handcuffs. How a $10,000 a month lifeline didn't just provide luxury, but fundamentally altered the load-bearing pillars of her reality, making the prospect of leaving feel like an existential freefall.
Then we dissected the dark pivot into complicity. The realization that the predator's ultimate goal wasn't just physical access to her friends, but the moral corruption of the author herself. Yeah, we saw how forcing her to broker that access shattered her identity and blurred the line between the exploited and the exploiter.
And we tracked the fallout. We watched a precise timeline of fading agency mutate into compounding regret and ultimately solidify into a paralyzing toxic shame.
A shame so pervasive that it dictates her present, terrifies her away from future love, and leaves her completely vulnerable to the unpredictable cruelty of social leakage.
It's just a devastating illustration of how power, capital, and psychological manipulation can dismantle a person's free will, and how brutally difficult it is to reconstruct a sense of self-worth when society instinctively condemns the survivor while entirely ignoring the mechanics of the trap.
Which brings me to the final thought I want to leave you with today. We've spent this entire time analyzing this anonymous woman's life, her invisible ledgers, her moral compromises, her suffocating shame. But the psychological mechanisms she is wrestling with are universally human. When we look back at our own histories, the mistakes that kept us awake, the times we compromised our own integrity, the collateral damage we caused others out of our own desperation, we almost universally view those past actions as being written in permanent marker.
We treat our past failures as unchangeable defining facts of our character.
Exactly. But when we assess our present selves, we somehow view our identity as being sketched in pencil. We treat our present growth as incredibly fragile, easily erased, just waiting to be rubbed out by the sudden judgment of others. We give the past absolute authority over the present. If this author has truly grown, as she desperately hopes she has, at what point does the past her stop owing an unpayable debt to the present her?
When does the statute of limitations on our own internal shame expire?
Right. So my question for you is this. What specific chapter of your own past are you still choosing to read as permanent ink? And more importantly, How much of your present value, your present joy, and your present relationships are you allowing that past chapter to hold hostage? Thank you for joining us on this deep dive. It was a heavy, complex exploration of the darkest corners of dependency, but exposing the architecture of these traps is the only way we learn how to dismantle them. Keep examining the narratives you hold, especially the ones you hold about yourself. We'll see you next time.